Thank you, Nicole. It's my great pleasure to moderate this session today, and it's even a greater pleasure to welcome Uli Prokosch virtually from Erlangen to this session today. Just a few words on his background. He's currently professor and chair for medical informatics at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. He is also the CIO at the University Hospital there, so then combining the roles as a scientist and the administrative duties, I guess, to keep the systems running in the hospital. And he's involved in many national and international projects. I'd just like to mention the Miracom consortium, which is one of 4 consortia in the medical informatics initiative, and obviously very important player in getting German health and medical data up to speed with respect to data sharing, etc. He's been also involved in the Codex project, or actually leading it, which brought together COVID-19 data as a response to the pandemic that we have all seen. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over the word and the stage to Uli Prokosch. So thanks very much for being with us today.
Okay, thank you very much for your very nice introduction. So let me just start to share my screen. So I hope this is everything worked right. Okay, so as you announced, the presentation I'm giving today will be from the context actually of leading 2 major projects in the MAI. The development of the FDGP was originally started in the Codex project, as you mentioned already, but it was then continued in the Abide ME project of the MEE. And I'm also the coordinator of the new follow-up project, which is called FDGPG+, which started in January this year and has another 4 years follow-up to continue the development. So this is just a screenshot of the German Research Data Portal for Health, or in order to explain the abbreviation, Deutsches Forschungsdatenportal für Gesundheit. Later on, I will go to this URL here and just give you a very short demonstration so that you can get a small impression on how you could work with the FDPG. But let me first start with the original aims of the Medical Informatics Initiative and give you some background what achievements had to be made in order to get the FDPG up and running. So the aim for the 5-year funding period from 2018 to 2022 was firstly focusing on university hospitals, and it aimed at integrating the numerous heterogeneous data silos, which we typically have within hundreds of smaller applications within our university hospitals, to integrate the data from those silos, mainly at the beginning from patient care documentation, but in a later phase also to integrate this data with data from medical research projects, to firstly integrate all such data within each of the German university hospitals, but then make it also possible to harmonize and integrate such data from all those university hospitals across all partner sites of the Medical Informatics Initiative. Integrating does not require to integrate data centrally. Integrating means large data sharing projects where a researcher can have access to all such data without the need to centralize all the data. It can be possible to centralize it, but it does not necessarily require this. And for accessing such data, what one needs is not just access to each of the university hospitals separately, but to establish one central portal for researchers. Via this portal, everybody should be able to find out numbers of available data, detailed numbers when somebody describes his cohort for a research project in more detail, but also be able to pursue an application project to have access to those data. And finally, within the Medical Informatics Initiative, we also had to prove the value of those integrated data repositories. For this purpose, every consortium had to define some clinical use cases to illustrate the value of the data integration centers. So the first task here to integrate those data silos was a task for all the data integration centers, which had to be established at all university hospitals. To prove the values of those integrated data repositories was a task of consortial use cases, which had to be defined within our project proposal. And finally, the portal which shall be used by researchers is the FTPG, on which I will focus later on in my presentation. So when we started in this funding phase, we were 4 different consortia, and within each consortium, every university hospital had to establish a data integration center, and each consortium had to pursue at least one. Most of the consortia had 3 different clinical use cases to prove its value. In order to link all those consortial work together, a coordination office was funded as well, and this coordination office was established at the TMF in coordination with the VUD in Germany and the MFT, the Association of the German Medical Faculties. What was necessary to not only have 4 lighthouses from the 4 consortia, but to be able to integrate data across all consortia, we have initiated a national steering committee with members of all 4 consortia and the coordination office, and members from the DLR and the BMBF also participated in each of our steering committee meetings. This steering committee initiated several working groups focusing on interoperability issues, on the required patient consent, on the structures for data sharing, and finally on communication. So the situation when we started was the following. We were challenged to really enable large-scale data sharing across 34 university hospitals. But unfortunately, those 34 university hospitals were spread over 4 consortia. Each of those consortia had within its original proposal some different data sharing approaches, and especially also different common data models. So we had some kind of heterogeneity, which we should hide as a cross-consortial effort to the outside research community. Nobody in the research community does care if data is coming from some university hospital within the future or from another university hospital within Smith or Heimet. For the outside researcher, all this should be transparent, and they should only use the FTPG to access those data independent where it comes from. So this is a plan at the beginning, and we had to overcome for this purpose numerous different challenges, from which I, in my presentation today, only want to focus on 4 different ones. The first one is obvious, I think, to everybody. With 4 different data models, we have a large data heterogeneity. And in order to tackle this, we need some interoperability approach. Within our working group for interoperability, it has been decided to define an MEE-wide core data set. And this definition should be based on FHIR profiles and should be described in detail in the FHIR profile implementation guides. The core data set definition consisted of basic modules and extension modules. The 6 basic modules are focusing on data about a person, a patient, the treatment case, and associated to those two entities, information about patient diagnosis, procedures performed, lab results, and medication data. Every location, every university hospital, independent from its participation in any of the use cases, should be should make those data available within their local FHIR servers, within their data integration centers. Additionally, there is a large set of extension modules depending and associated with the different clinical use cases from the consortia. And in the current phase, we have in the Abide ME project also added biosample information, the consent information from the patients, and what has been balloted and finally defined yet already is the intensive care medical core data set, but only the first component of it. All the other modules are still under development, some of them in the final balloting phase. The next challenge then was data privacy and data protection. So I already mentioned that data integration does not need to lead to central data integration, but some researchers might want to have some centralized data integration, especially when they then want to link those data, maybe with claims data from insurance companies or with other data. But this would require in our German data protection situation that we receive the patient's consent to allow from the side of the patient to make his or her data available in a centralized database for central research efforts. On the other side, we could already use some privacy-preserving federated analysis and pursue such analysis, because typically in most of our 16 states in Germany, we have state data protection regulations or state hospital regulations, which do allow the local usage of clinical data for research purposes. So as long as those data are anonymized, pseudonymized, and not transferred to some outside location, one can access this data, pursue analysis locally, and maybe transfer aggregated data within such a federated network to a central institution. And this central institution can then aggregate the data within some kind of meta-analysis to the final results. But nevertheless, for some of the projects, we aimed of pursuing data integration in a central database. So we have to work on this broad consent, which would allow that we transfer data also within a central database. So the working group consent has been working for quite a while in cooperation with all the 16 data protection officers, with the working group biobanks of the German ethics committees, in order to define the text and of the patient information and the modular broad consent, which was then, after about 2.5 years of long discussions, finally agreed upon with all German state data protection officers. Modularity of this broad consent means that every patient asked for his consent can decide to those 4 options to allow to use hospital acquired data for research purposes, to allow biosample use in research projects, but to also allow to link the clinical data from the hospital with data acquired from outpatient clinics, from the insurance companies, and finally also to allow to recontact patients. And what was the purpose of this modularity? A patient can either consent to all those 4, he can withdraw from all those 4 options, or he can consent to any mixture and combination of those 4 modules. Finally, the working group on communication developed this text in several languages, not only in German. It also developed a version for children and minors, and it developed an introductory film for patients to have this short film of about 3 to 4 minutes, maybe available in the admission areas or in waiting room areas of all university hospitals in Germany. So whenever a patient comes to any of the German university hospitals, he or she should in future be asked about the same text and the same patient information to give his consent to maybe all 4 or at least some of the modules part of this broad consent. In order to manage the whole process and especially the consents given by the patients and also the withdrawal projects, we needed in all our university hospitals digital support, some IT system to manage all those consents in their modularity. And typically, most of the university hospitals have already initiated new organizational units as a trusted third party in its university hospital. In some of the university hospitals, this task is still managed by the Data Integration Center. But for example, at our university hospital here in Erlangen, we have initiated a trusted third party, which is directly governed by the board of directors of our university hospital and not linked or associated to the IT department or the Data Integration Center anymore. A third challenge we had to tackle was to achieve throughout all 34 university hospitals some kind of common regulatory framework and a complete description of all data sharing processes where the different regulations should work on supporting the process. So our data sharing governance currently is based on a lot of work and a lot of paperwork which has been done by the task force and the working group on data sharing. Firstly, they have defined a now ME-wide data and biosample use regulation. We have a data and biosample application template, which is available through the FTPG and is the same for all university hospitals. We have a contract template which has been negotiated also with all legal departments of all university hospitals. And whenever a researcher applies for some patient data and the use and access committees within the university hospitals give their positive vote to this project, the same contract template is always used to provide the contract for all the participants in this project and with a researcher. So I mentioned already that at each university hospital, use and access committees have been established, typically with a group of researchers, maybe members from an ethics committee, members from the data protection, members from the IT departments, or from the board of directors of the hospitals. And every application for data usage is governed by this use and access committee, and they can make the decision depending on the description of a project if they want to provide their data from the local data sources to this project or not. Well, the last challenge, I think not only we in the Medical Informatics Initiative, all of us had to tackle was the start of the COVID-19 pandemics in 2020 and mainly 2020 and 2021. For us in the project line, it was very important to keep continuity in our strategic project planning and development of our components, even though we had to use a lot of our resources in 2020 and 2021 for different new projects coming in to establish, as already mentioned, the Codex platform to collect COVID-19 related data based on the GECKO dataset definition. So we had a sub-project in between. Actually, in January, February of 2020, we were almost ready with the application of a proposal for the Abide-ME project, which aims at integrating biobanking and data integration centers at the local university hospitals. And one major technical effort in this project was to establish a feasibility portal based on the 6 basic core dataset modules, which I had already mentioned, additionally based on the consent module and on the biosample module. When then the COVID-19 pandemics led to the creation of the Network University Medicine, the NUM, and NUM supported project funding for several projects in order to tackle the COVID-19 pandemics with research efforts, but also with coordinated efforts in clinical care. The MEE consortia and the data integration centers of the MEE applied for funding for developing the COVID-19 data exchange platform. We were successful in this application and could start this development then in 2020, very early already in the early summer. And in order to have a continuation of our development, we decided that one part in this COVID-19 data exchange platform should be the feasibility portal with the same generic features as we had aimed already for in the Abide-ME project, but in the first step, just focusing on clinical parameters relevant for COVID-19 patients described in the GECKO, in the consented GECKO dataset description. So afterwards, when the Abide-ME project was then funded also for 2021 until end of June 2023, so the Abide-ME project will end in a few days. We continued this work from the Codex projects in the Abide-ME project in order to extend the feasibility portal then to the 6 basic core dataset modules, including also consent and biosample modules then. So the FDPG, which resulted from this work, has now several components. First of all, it consisted of the described feasibility portal, which provides a technical network accessing all data integration center file servers. It also consists of a data use application management tool, which allows researchers in the next step to enter a project description and apply for data usage in the network of all university hospitals in Germany, and such applications are then automatically delivered from the data integration centers to the use and access committees, which is in each university hospitals. And the decision to participate with their data or not to participate is also then returned after the decision has been made in the use and access committees to the FDPG staff. So the FDPG then organizes also the complete communication of a researcher applying for such data with the university hospitals, allowing to finalize the already mentioned data use contracts, and then initiating the data integration center-based transfer units to transfer to the researcher, depending on the type of analysis where he had applied for, to either transfer the complete patient cohorts, which is only possible for patients for whom the broad consent does allow this already, and to also, or in the second situation, to transfer the aggregated results of federated analysis to the researcher so that he or she can integrate it, the subset of the results to a meta-analysis and to the final complete results of the project. This is managed by data management units, which are currently in the current projects provided by members of the different data integration centers. Finally, as it was required from the data protection officers within the text of the broad consent, we also need to provide public information about metadata of all available data sets and a transparency portal so that every patient can see what type of projects have already been pursued with the data they have consented to. So it's kind of a registry of all data use projects. Okay, so let me come to a small presentation now. This is the entry point of the Forschungsportal für Gesundheit. And if you just scroll down, I can show you it has been open to the public already in last October, but for the first half year, we had only been using it within the university hospitals in Germany. But in mid-May, it was opened also for any researcher outside of the university medicine landscape. And the current data overview shows that currently from the 34 university hospitals, 25 are already linked to the network, and we can provide more than 8 million data sets from more than 8 million patients with more than 40 million diagnoses, 100,000 of bio samples, more than 100,000 patients have consented to their use in research projects also within central environments. And for example, we can provide more than 300 million different lab values. So just to give some information about the transparency portal, which I have mentioned, with the patient information on the project is given here. And we can find some information how such feasibility queries can be generated, some first information about the user interface here, and we have also a portal where all the research projects are illustrated. So let me just log in now to show you how a feasibility query is pursued. This is a user interface for feasibility queries, and we can precisely define a cohort with inclusion criteria and with exclusion criteria. So when we enter in this here in this catalog, the catalog is categorized based on the core dataset modules, which I had already mentioned. Here we can define some specific data on information on bioprobes, from which type of biomaterial we want to find some patient information with availability of biosamples. We can include the consent of the patient. We can any diagnosis by lab items, by medication based on the ATC and particular patient data. Let's start with, if I just want to make a short illustration, querying on female patients and just starting this query. We currently have a timeout of 1 minute. So the system is now accessing all the 34 or currently 25 data integration centers in the background. And here, after the first period, we do get already the message that we have at least 466,000 of patients' data. But it still continues to connect to the other university hospitals which have not responded yet. And I assume it should come more than, well, actually it's 4 million. So this is already the number we will expect probably, because we have a little bit more than 8 million patient data set. Looking for female patients should be a little bit more than half of it. So after 1 minute is finished, we get an overview from the university hospitals which have replied. So we can then look at the details, and we can see that One of the university hospitals has more than 1 million, the next 900,000. So this is the distribution of data which is currently available from the different university hospital partners. In the data usage regulations, we have decided that names of the university hospitals should not be obvious here, so that we pseudonymize the university hospitals. And the fact that some of the university hospitals currently deliver 0 patients is related that those 2 university hospitals still have data protection officers which do not allow to answer such queries. They are still in discussion with them. Some of the university hospitals currently have just a small set of half a year of data maybe available, and other university hospitals with those large numbers provide data already for more than 10 years backwards. So that's the reason why we have such kind of a heterogeneity in the numbers here. So the next step would then be to go into the portal and then enter a project description, and then this project description can be submitted to the data integration centers. This should be sufficient for a first introduction. Let me just come back to my slides and tell you just at the end of my presentation some details about a few of the lessons learned, which we had to realize during the last year of some projectathons. First of all, we had to realize, considering the fact of interoperability, that the current version of the FHIR implementation guides, which we have agreed upon, is still not precise enough for full data harmonization across all the university hospitals. There's still some freedom to interpret how those FHIR profiles should be generated, and that's the reason why in some queries currently from some of the university hospitals data are not yet found. So what we had to realize is that we have to come to a much more precise and final definition of the core data set. Concerning the broad consent, it took already 2.5 years to really consent this text with all the data protection officers in Germany, but it will still take a long time to really implement its logistic and organizational process to gathering this broad consent from all patients in all our university hospitals. Because typically the consent management tool, which is implemented in our data integration center, requires interfaces to the admission system and to the electronic health record of the university hospital and the vendors of those systems to discuss how the interface to the consent management system should be implemented. This takes quite a while, and typically to really set up a project for them to create these interfaces can take more than half a year. Also, it is not very easy just to implement the consenting process and the patient information process directly into the patient admission process. The data protection officers have required that it should be a separate step. It can be after the patient admission, but it has to be an obvious separate step. And such separate steps typically comprise a time period of 8 to 10 minutes. And this is really a long time. And every university hospital has to check how this can be integrated in their local processes. Based on this, we currently have only about 200,000 patient consents obtained, and it still needs some more piloting information to really get the rollout within all our university hospitals. This low number of currently obtained patient consents is currently still kind of a blocker for centralized data analysis, because we can only provide very small numbers to some central analysis. And for this reason, the current projects have mainly focused on federated analysis. But for the federated analysis, we also had to learn that the typical researchers does not know the syntax, how to extract data from firestores and to analyze this data. So we are currently establishing some kind of support infrastructure so that the data integration centers are linked with researchers from a university hospital and can support those researchers in creating their data extraction queries and also in creating their analyzing scripts. Also, the current version of the graphical interface to define the project application had some free text data entry fields, which could be differentially interpreted. And whenever you have some opportunities for different interpretations, that's what typically happens. And the FTPG staff in most of our current projects had to communicate between the researchers to really find out what type of data he really requires and applies for. So in the next version, we will add new functionality to this application form so that researchers does not have to enter this data description in free text anymore, but can select it from the selection tree of the ontology as I have described in the feasibility portal. Also, we have to set up more frequent data use and access committee meetings, or the university have to allow alternatively electronic voting so that the waiting time for the final decision of use and access committees throughout Germany is not so long anymore. Finally, some of our university hospitals still require manual signatures under a contract, under a data use contract. And you can imagine what an effort it takes to really have one contract to send out to more than 20 university hospitals, maybe participating in the project, to get us a manual signature from all of them. This can take weeks also. So we have still very time-consuming process for from the moment application has been entered from a researcher to the final data delivery, and we are working on optimizing this project and minimizing the delivery time. So what we are currently doing then with the FTPG Plus project, which has just started, is really to continuously provide also checkups for data quality within federated analysis, to also detect differences in data harmonization. We are extending the feasibility tool with new core data sets in the upcoming months and years based on new Module 3 projects. We are, as already mentioned, developing structured data selection and data extraction tools, and continuously working on optimizing the whole process. And finally, we will also involve researchers and patients as stakeholders to pursue usability evaluations of the FTPG and find out about needs to improve the usability and the user interface of the system. So coming back to the beginning, this was the infrastructure we had in 2018 to 2022. The funding was based on the funding of 4 consortia and 1 coordination office. We are now in the follow-up period, 2023 until 2026, and the situation is unfortunately a little bit more complicated. The coordination office process is called a Module 2A funding now, and we had to realize that we need more central work, central projects to provide central support for the whole centralized approach. So as, for example, the FTPG Plus project is a new Module 2B project for centralized infrastructure. We have also now a new terminology service as a centralized infrastructure project. The data management unit will be developed within the transit project as new central infrastructure component. And we have implemented the data sharing framework coming from the HIMET consortia as a main middleware between the central FTPG and all the data integration centers. And the support for all further development in this area is given by the DSF community project. Further, the data integration centers are no longer directly part of the consortia. They are now funded within the new funding line NUM-DITS as a new NUM-DITS project. And the clinical and methodological use cases are no longer part of the consortial project, but are cross-consortial project. So we currently have 11 different clinical and methodological so-called module 3 use cases in which data integration centers and university hospitals from all 4 consortia have to participate. So this is a situation with a much more complicated governance structure, which we are currently setting up, where more central modules have been added to the development now to support the work which has been developed based on the ABIDE-ME and the CODEC project in the last funding phase, and the work which has been done centrally by the coordination office. So I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope I have been able to give you a good overview about the functionalities and the features of the FTTPG portal and of the new central services which are now in the future accomplishing the task to really set up a fully integrated central infrastructure for large data sharing projects. Thank you very much for listening.